Good morning, everybody. I don't know quite how loud that is, so I'll try not to shout. I'm naturally quite loud. Welcome to the first ever Southend GreenFest. Hey! The next 2 days should hopefully be much less stressful than the last 2 weeks that I've had trying to organise and arrange it all. Now I can actually enjoy it. We are very privileged to, over the next few days, be able to use this wonderful venue to be able to talk about green politics, environmentalism, social justice, all those wonderful things that we do in the Green Party naturally. Hopefully approach a bigger audience than we would normally, and hopefully just have a really good 2 days of discussion. We're really lucky this morning to be kicked off by Jon Fuller, who recently has been doing a lot of work with the Extinction Rebellion, but that you might know against the BBC against green bias and the Climate Genocide Act now. Jon's going to talk to us this morning a bit about his work and Extinction Rebellion. So welcome, Jon.
Cheers. Right, okay, thank you very much indeed. There is a formal talk that's planned and delivered by Extinction Rebellion. It's about extinction, what to do about it. And this isn't that talk. This talk really is designed for people who are coming to GreenFest, who probably know a bit about the climate change, but I obviously have to say a bit about the scale of the threat that we have to face. But then I'm going to just talk really about Extinction Rebellion, what we've achieved, where we're doing well, we're not so well, and then have time for people to have a discussion. So I'm going to kick straight off with a bit about the science. And it's frightening, and it is bad news. And if there was a younger audience here, I would beforehand inform people that this can be disturbing, it can be upsetting, but we have to go through this, we have to work through this. I have been referred to in the Sun as a snowflake because I'm infamous, because I said that I would no longer give talks to primary school age children. You have to tone it down, you have to pitch it at the right level, whereas the work I do is about telling people the truth, and that has to be pitched at the right age group. So, here we go. First thing I want to really mention about the media is that hardly any media outlet at all mentioned a very important speech given in September 2018 by the UN Secretary General. He had got an advance copy of the latest IPCC report, and in it he'd been reading about various climate feedbacks, and he'd seen their projections, and they're based upon probabilities. And he therefore called the world together. He asked all media outlets to come along, listen to his major speech on climate change. He appealed to everybody to cover his speech, and hardly any media outlet in the UK did. But he warned that we now face runaway climate change, and he said that this is a direct existential threat. I also quickly like to emphasise it to people, in case there's anybody in the audience who might be doubting about the scale of scientific certainty about climate change, the fact that it is caused by human activities, principally burning fossil fuels, agriculture and deforestation. And I refer to a study of all peer-reviewed science across 2013 and 2014, which found that of the 24,210 peer-reviewed articles during that period have been authored by 69,406 authors. Just 5 articles, which have been written by 4 authors, disputed the core science that climate change has been caused by human activities like burning fossil fuels. So the scientific certainty is, in fact, well over 99%. And the recent study was also done on all the peer-reviewed research done in 2018, and it was 100%. 100% certainty. One of the greatest scientific endeavours in human history, finding out everything to do with climate change, and we are at the point of absolute certainty. Hit that too hard. Now, when you hear TV, go back a few years, people used to talk about we've got to keep temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius of heating. More recently, they say we've got to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius of heating. If you listen to the BBC, they imply that that's a safe level. For several years, they said 2 degrees Celsius was a safe level. Then they said 1.5 degrees Celsius is a safe level. It's not. Now, I want to just simply refer back to 2018. We had very powerful hurricane season in the Caribbean. This is the president of Dominica. His nation was completely flattened. There wasn't a house that was left undamaged. Virtually every house had been flattened. And virtually everybody had to leave the island. Most of the people went to either Europe or to other Caribbean islands. And he stood up at the UN General Assembly that immediately followed Hurricane Maria, and he said, we have permanently altered the climate between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. and things will never be the same again. Immediately following him was Darren Henfield. He's the Foreign Office Minister of the Bahamas, and he said that never before in the Bahamas had they had to evacuate so many people ahead of Hurricane Maria. He said, what comes next? The complete evacuation of the Caribbean? And this summer, Hurricane Damien hits Bahamas, and sure enough, for the Bahamas, they had to evacuate a huge part of their island network. This is Abaco Islands, and everybody had to just leave. I will mention Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. That was a relatively developed country. It lost its national grid for several months, and 8% of the population left there after Hurricane Maria. Most of them went to the United States. 3% of the population returned, but you're still down by 5% of the population. The key point I want to make here is that our world has warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius. Not 1.5, not 2 degrees, 1.1. And at 1.1 degrees Celsius, we are already pummeling islands into the point of complete destruction where people have no choice but to leave. So the era of the climate refugee is firmly upon us. I think that here in the UK, it's just images like this all the time. Constant images now. We're seeing flooding again and again and again. And that is probably one of the main reasons actually here in the UK why people's attitudes towards climate change are changing. Most recent Ipsos Mori poll says that 85% of people accept the science and are concerned about climate change. 52% of people describe themselves as very concerned. And I've seen a more recent opinion poll that shows that people see that climate change is more important as an issue than crime, immigration, and the economy. And there seems to be a greater realisation now that this is a crisis and it's upon us. Now, the Paris COP21 targets are... this was the agreement that was reached in December 2015 in Paris. That commits the world to keeping temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius. And then later on in the second half of this century, we are to pursue efforts to limit temperatures further still to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The way the plan is to do that is just insane plan, but basically all the carbon dioxide we're dumping in the atmosphere today, we have to find a technology that draws it back out the atmosphere again. And we have to do that after the year 2050. It has to run, technology has to run from the year 2050 to 2100. That is the insane plan. Somehow we have to find that technology, and young people have to do it. It's going to cost an absolute fortune, even if we can develop the technology, and the young have to pay. Now, as I say, these are the targets shown here. At Paris, the pledges that so far have been made put us on track for 3.3 degrees Celsius of warming. Business as usual, which is actually where we are. For instance, countries like Brazil and Russia are still chopping down loads of trees. So although we've got pledges for 3.3, the reality is that we're probably heading for 4.2. And yet, you know, we're still talking in terms of can we limit temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius. The reality is we're heading far much worse than that. I want to quickly run through some graphs, projections done by United States University. I'll quickly say at this point, these slides, underneath every single image is a hyperlink. So if anybody wants the slides, you're very welcome to have them, and you'll see the hyperlinks to all the information. This is rainfall patterns between the year 2000 and 2009, droughts and rain. You'll see how these change. This is the projection between 2030 and 2039. So I'm going to try and use that red button now. So it's getting a lot drier around the Mediterranean, a lot drier in the United States, a lot drier China, and also the Amazon's beginning to dry out. Jump forward. Now this is 2060 to 2069, and you're seeing very dramatic changes. The key point here is you're going to see probably a mega drought in the United States, severe drought in China. And the UK, us here, we import nearly around 50% of our food. So the core question going forward, not too far into the future, you know, in the lifetimes of some of the youngest people in this room, the big question is, where are you going to get your food from? Now, one of the core things about the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is that they recognise that there are uncertainties in the climate system. One of the greatest uncertainties is what's happening in the Arctic, and I'll explain that in a second. But they say that recently they did a special report on what it would take to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius of global heating. And that was the one where they said we need 45% cuts in emissions by the year 2030. And that they said would completely transform societies. But you have to do that if you want to have a chance of hitting 1.5 degrees Celsius. Here's the thing. It's a 50% chance of hitting 1.5. Just a 50% chance you can avoid complete catastrophe. And that means completely transforming our economies by the year 2030. This is one of the greatest uncertainties. So this picture here taken by NASA shows the extent of Arctic sea ice in 1984 and September 2016. So you'll see that the ice is both thinning, it's much, much thinner, and it's retreated. This is what's happening. When sunlight hits ice from space, 90% of the sun's energy is reflected back out into space. The ice appears to be white. When the ice retreats, 94% of the sun's energy is absorbed by the ocean. Now, at the moment in the Arctic, you've still got quite a thin layer of ice across there throughout the summer, and it's still reflecting, doing its core job of reflecting sunlight and energy back out into space. But we're getting very close to the point where we will have an Arctic-free summer. NOAA, the North, I'm trying to think of what NOAA stands for. United States primary body for predicting both weather and climate patterns, NOAA, they have just published a report just a couple of days ago saying that they would expect the Arctic to be free of ice by the year 2035. Now, if you follow the science, you know that a lot of scientists will tell you who actually study this stuff, they say it could be sooner than that. It could be as soon as the year 2030. They'll be free by the September, the end of the summer. I'm sure everybody knows this, but in the Arctic, the sun doesn't set for 4 months of the year. It's a vast amount of energy that we're talking about. Absolutely huge amounts of energy will be going into our Earth system as soon as that ice retreats. So there is a feeling amongst a lot of scientists that we are, over the next 10 years, we're going to suddenly go over a cliff. So this, again, is a NASA map, and it shows where the warming in the world is. It's primarily in the Arctic, also in Antarctica. There are other parts of the world warming, United States most notably, but most of the heating in the world is at the Arctic. And then, again, I recommend you actually get hold of these slides. I'll send them to anybody who wants them by email. But then you'll kick off a series of a much faster process of climate breakdown, where methane is trapped in various different forms in the Arctic, principally in permafrost. And as it melts, that methane is released into the atmosphere. Now, methane, taken over an average of a 100-year period, for some reason the scientists do it that way. They say that methane is 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. It's more powerful over a shorter period, but they average it out over 100 years. And you're going to find, with the Arctic ice retreating, a sudden surge of heating in the Arctic and far more methane being released from permafrost and other sources. There's very bit of technical detail there, but you can see it if you get the slides. Now, it can be quite spectacular. These holes are about the size of a house in Siberia, the ML methane blowholes. This is something that's quite spectacular. You can see examples of this on YouTube, where there will be these explosions in the night, or any time of day, actually, where methane builds up under the permafrost. It suddenly ejects a vast amount of material out, and then quite quickly they fill in with water. And this is something that's being seen ever more frequently in Siberia. But there are other feedbacks, what are called climate feedbacks. I referred to methane, I referred to what's happening in the Arctic with ice. That, I should add, is albedo. That's referred to as albedo, the reflectivity of any substance. Now, again, it's not showing up too well, but there are forest fires here in 2017, NASA image, and NASA said that this was likely to be the worst forest fires in 10,000 years across Siberia. And it just ejects a huge amount of extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. As the Arctic warms, we're seeing far more burning. Forest fires in California, we've seen it in Europe, we're seeing it in California on the west coast, and more carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere. Obviously, this last summer, Australia summer. Absolutely awful, really frightening. where you've got a situation where there's far more carbon dioxide being emitted than all the cars in Australia. Now, then there's another one, I won't mention all the climate feedbacks, there are a hell of a lot of them, but I'm mentioning the main ones. The other one is that as the world warms, soil is getting warmer. That increases the activity of microbes, microbiological activity, and so as they breathe, if you like, they breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide, and that too is accelerating the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, there was a report published in Nature magazine, 27th of November, 19, on the various different tipping points. And the emphasis here is that we will very suddenly go from one state to another. And they identify where the main tipping points are. This was covered a bit more by the media, but I really feel that still, most people in the UK, they now understand that climate change is real, they see that it's dangerous, they see flooding taking place, but they don't realise they're actually getting very close to the precipice, where this is going to completely spin out of control. The staggering risk we're running. At the moment, politicians seem to be adopting the attitude, fingers crossed, it won't be too bad. Let's not be pessimistic. Let's be optimistic. Hope. Hope is not good enough when the science is pointing to an absolute crisis. Now, we are on, currently we're about 415 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, it was about 270 parts per million. So we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere quite significantly. A key fact, perhaps a lot of people don't realise, is that if we turned off the CO2 tap today, and we just said, right, no more flights, no more cars, nothing, we're turning off the CO2 tap today, the planet would still continue to warm. It's because the Arctic and Antarctica, sort of, if you like, artificially, if you like, freezing or keeping cool our planet. But that amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, 415 parts per million, equates to a much warmer world. It just takes a long time for us to reach that point. The last time the Earth had concentrations like that was 3 million years ago during the Pliocene era. And at that point, Earth was 2 to 3 degrees Celsius hotter, and sea levels were 50 to 60 feet higher than they are today. So here's the thing. If we turn off the CO2 tap today, we will slow the pace of climate change, but we are committed to a planet where here, that's Greenland, most of the ice is gone, and ice is retreating from Antarctica. And that's just if we turn off the CO2 tap. The only way we repair this is a vast, absolutely huge effort to repair climate, drawing vast amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And if we carry on burning CO2, we will reach an Eocene era climate. Now, that was last about 250 million years ago. There was a mass extinction event then. Very little life on Earth survived that. It was probably caused by a series of volcanoes. And CO2 concentrations reached about 750 parts per million. And there was virtually no ice on the planet. And that's just death. And if we don't turn off the CO2 tap damn fast and start repairing our climate by drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, that's where we're headed. And sea levels are about 240 feet higher than they are today. But if we, as I say, if we turn off the CO2 tap today, we act with incredible speed. That doesn't have to be the outcome. Now, I always like to, occasionally throw in the odd picture, and it's if Professor Stephen Hawking says that we're heading for extinction, people ought to sit up and pay attention. And the media ought to warn people that this is a very real threat. This isn't fringe science, this is mainstream science. The IPCC, that's their job, to tell us what the probabilities are. And they say we've only got a 50% chance of meeting 1.5 if we get 45% cuts by the year 2030. And we're nowhere near it. We're miles adrift. Okay, so when people read the science, when people get to understand what's happening, they actually think we're heading out for a cliff. So this chap, Roger Hallam, he invited me to a talk he was giving in London. It was the first one as he was thinking about setting up Extinction Rebellion, and it was climate change, why we're heading for extinction and what to do about it. Now, it was a bit rough and ready. You can still see it on YouTube. He's not a great public speaker, and he has a theory. His theory is that it's about social change. What will actually change society? How could we actually mobilise people to actually stop all the vested interests that are involved in allowing this crisis to unfold? And he looked at a range of civil disobedience movements over very many years, from Gandhi in India to the suffragettes, loads of examples. And he believed that the evidence strongly pointed to the fact that you didn't need a huge proportion of the population. You needed about 3.5% of the population to achieve a very radical change movement. Now, when I saw him, I met him, he said, "Come on, John, just get involved in this, you need to." And I was very reluctant. I said, no, I'm going to go down a different route. I won't tell you the route I took, there's no time. But at the time I said, no, I'm not going to. But I really wish you well, Roger. And this is Gail Bradbrook. Gail, they were both good friends. Gail got hold of Roger's material and tidied it up and greatly improved it. She's got a completely different public speaking style. I have immense admiration for Gail. I like Roger too, but he drives me mad. But Gail is an extraordinary person. And she tidied up the material and included the other crucial part of this equation, which is it's not just about climate change. Everything we are doing as a species is pummeling wildlife. And so she said we need to think in terms of this as a climate and ecological emergency. It's both. As humans get pushed back, wherever that may be, whether we're struggling for food and we're needing to dig deeper into the Amazon, wherever it may be, we push wildlife back. So there was a report by the United Nations done 7th of May 2019. Again, the hyperlinks are under this chart if you want to see it. And they predict a loss of millions species of wildlife. And it's just horrendous. We're not talking about individual creatures. It's whole species being driven into extinction. And humans are absolutely pummeling life on this planet. It's absolutely awful, the scale of the threat. Now, unfortunately for me, I did listen to Roger Hallam, and I ended up being arrested here in Oxford Street. And in April 2019, there was the first period of time of the of rebellion, if you like, a 2-week period when Extinction Rebellion really had a huge number of people out in the streets protesting about climate breakdown and the ecological crisis. And it is important to emphasise that people involved in this do see the two as incredibly linked. It's not just one or the other, they are linked. And, I was sat down, I think, somewhere here between the two police cordons, and my time came and I managed to squeeze myself next to the pink boat. And the pink boat is really important where it was, its position, because it's just within sight of BBC Broadcasting House. So BBC Broadcasting House staff all got to see it. It was there for several days. And we wanted to keep it there as long as we possibly could, so that people would read that on the side every day of the week, tell the truth. And lots of us were arrested in the April Rebellion. I think it's about 1,300, 1,400 people were arrested. And I guess, I think probably what I want to jump through to now, I'm just trying to think what I was going to say about the suffragettes, but what I want to jump through to now is that a huge amount happened after the April Rebellion, but not so much happened during the Autumn Rebellion. In October, we had another period of time when there were huge protests in and around London and other parts of the country, but not a huge amount happened. And I just want to, if you like, get people thinking about what is it that drives social change. Because the suffragettes, a lot of people think the suffragettes achieved social change, but they didn't actually achieve the vote in the UK. They gave up their actions on the outset of World War I in 1914, and women in the UK didn't all get the vote until 14 years later, in 1928. So it was other social movements within the UK. So I want people to, if you like, if we do have a few questions and answers in a few minutes, people to debate and discuss what is it that would drive radical social change. Roger Hallam and other social scientists will tell us we only need 3.5% of the population, or maybe 1 million people. But how do we actually do it? How do we achieve it? So, and there was a radical difference between what happened in April and what happened in October. Right. Now, in a moment, that's my final slide, but in a moment, I'm just going to talk about what actually happened. But I like to leave that one there as my final slide. Soylent Green is a famous movie, and it was a series of crises hitting humanity, and Charlton Heston in that movie back in 1970s predicted by the year 2022 we were going to need this, and that's where we all actually end up being turned to mush and we eat each other. It's a very cheerful outcome. Now, I always leave that there in these talks as a sort of like a warning for the future. So just as we perhaps discuss a couple of points now, we'll just leave that there. There's always a warning to people about what we're talking about here, and that is the collapse of civilization. That's potentially what we're talking about, collapse of our food supply and then the collapse of civilization. So just to quickly take you back to April, 7 things happened after the April Rebellion. First of all, there was Parliament had debates instigated by the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party surprisingly went along with it, and Parliament declared its own declaration of climate and ecological emergency. That was on the 1st of May 2019, just within a very short period of time of the April Rebellion. Then a load more local authorities took far more interest, and they declared their own local authority declaration of climate emergency. We had Parliament, or the Conservative Party under Theresa May, announced that the 2050 target, which was then 80% cuts by 2050, she was going to strengthen that to be 100% cuts by 2050. Remind myself quickly what other points we made. We achieved far more progress with media. ITN, for instance, introduced a new series called Earth on the Edge as part of their news programmes. BBC introduced Our World Matters. And Extinction Rebellion, I was part of the delegation that went to meet senior BBC executives to talk about their news output, and we also met ITN executives. And the news output has improved from the main broadcasters in the UK. It's not where it needs to be, but it has improved. And also 6 parliamentary committees agreed to set up a citizens' assembly. And that is actually taking place now. So there were, in fact, 7 outcomes. The other one was, I'm going to also put in there, change in public opinion, this Ipsos Mori poll that said that, so many more people were concerned about climate change. So I think we achieved 7 things as a result of the April Rebellion. And then here we are now, 2020, there have been other things happening. We've got the Heathrow decision. We had judges, for once, which seemed extraordinary. Judges actually agreed with climate campaigners, campaigning lawyers, and said that Heathrow couldn't go ahead. The government said that the rationale or the purpose of the UK's Oil and Gas Authority would have to be changed. Currently, it says that its purpose, its stated purpose, number one objective is to get the maximum amount of oil and gas out of UK waters, and they're going to change that. And we've got the government also, quite surprising, I was really surprised by this, for Conservatives to agree to end the ban on onshore wind power in England. So there are changes afoot. It's very difficult to say, what did Extinction Rebellion do? What did it achieve? What was the school strikes? What was Friends of the Earth's role in this Heathrow decision, taking the government's call? But I don't think there's any way anybody can rationally argue that Extinction Rebellion didn't have a huge impact in this. It was a really core part of it. You can't say it achieved all of it, but you can't say it achieved none of it. So that's really where I am. I wanted to give people the science. I want people to understand that this is a crisis, this is an existential threat, and only the most extraordinary action is going to save us. And then the other thing I wanted to do today was talk to you about Extinction Rebellion, what we've achieved so far. October, we didn't achieve quite so much. Anyway, over to people now. Open debate, throw questions at me. Simon.
John, this is a difficult question for me because I haven't quite put it together yet. But I'm going to be asking a lot of people. When you look at this theoretical concept of net zero, can you explain to people why we shouldn't be accepting the blithe use of this by people in government, people in organisations that are actually trying to offset their carbon load? If you listen to what Greta Thunberg, who is probably the most visible person in the whole movement, says, it's already on fire. Net zero is relatively meaningless because it's conceptual, it's not real. And if people are constantly offsetting and blaming China and America instead of doing something themselves, where do we stand with this ridiculous notion that net zero is something that can be achieved instead of actually looking at actually doing something in 2020 rather than waiting till 2039 as the Labour Party are waiting, 2050 as the Tories are going for, even 2025 to 30 as the Green Party are going for. We can't achieve that because it's a theoretical concept. So what is more reasonable for you measure of how we can start to reverse the trend?
Well, I better mention just a couple of points in there. During the Paris negotiations in December 2015, a lot of scientists said, well, look, we need to develop a technology, and they proposed bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. And what they said was that in future we'll be chopping down loads of trees, we'll be burning them to generate electricity, and the carbon dioxide will be captured and then stored underground. And then new trees all the time will be growing, and then we'd increasingly chop those down, capture the carbon. So that all the time, carbon dioxide is being drawn out of the atmosphere by these new electricity power plants, and carbon dioxide being captured and stuck underground. The problem is that carbon capture and storage with oil and gas is really struggling to get over 60% capture. Now, burning wood material is much more complex. I'm not a chemist and I can't explain it to you, but there are a stack of scientists who will say to you that if we can't quite get carbon capture and storage right with something like coal or gas that's uniform, we're not going to get burning wood right, or wood pellets right. And so now here we are in 2020, and a lot of scientists will say, it doesn't look like BECCS is going to happen at scale. So politicians haven't really moved away from that position. They've got this notion that after the year 2050, we will magic up a new technology. We were thinking it was BECCS, now we think it won't be BECCS, but we're still going to magic up a technology. For me, personally, I think this is one of the greatest outrages of all this, is that young people do not know that the plan is that we carry on flying, we still drive our cars, we do all the things we currently do, and then the young people who are alive after the year 2050, they have to pay to take out the atmosphere all the CO2 we dump there today. All of it. The whole lot has got to come back out. They have to pay. And there's, again, I can give people a hyperlink to it, but there was a peer-reviewed research done on the costs of two technologies. One was called enhanced weathering. Flipping out, this stuff gets complicated, and direct air capture. There are technologies out there, but they are flipping expensive. Direct air capture is about $600 a tonne, carbon dioxide to get it out of the atmosphere. Enhanced weathering means where you have these huge number of open cast mines, and you quarry certain types of rock, and you pummel it, and it absorbs carbon dioxide. So you scar the landscape, and it's a huge industry, and that costs about $100 a tonne. Now, working on the basis of what that would cost the young, the peer-reviewed research said it would cost probably, from the year 2050 to 2100, about 535 trillion. The UK's share of that would be about 8 trillion. The UK's national debt, which we're probably never even going to pay off, is currently about 2 trillion. So nobody's ever given a debt like that from one generation to the next. It's never happened before. The only solution to this, there is only one way to do this, and that is we have to slash greenhouse gas emissions right now. We need dramatic sacrifice, real lifestyle changes immediately. It will hurt or impact every single one of us, and then we have to start the job of climate repair, and that could take centuries. And I don't know, Simon, whether I answer your question or not, but I tell you, it's phenomenal.
Also, just one supplementary comment to that before I tell you else on the floor. Nature invented itself probably the greatest carbon capture and storage device ever. And if you don't burn it, it never releases that carbon. That carbon is used to basically keep the ecosystem going. It's called a tree. So in nature, with that in mind, if you look at Stag, if you look at Birmingham, if you look at the tree campaigns in Bristol that are planting more and more trees as natural traffic barriers, because people will crash into a metal post, you won't crash into a 40-foot oak tree. It's been proven in Bristol. Why are we not just planting trees everywhere? And sod the idea that these trees might occasionally cause a little bit of subsidence with regard to houses. Coal mining caused a hell of a lot more subsidence than the tree will. So just on that...
Yep, sure. Okay. So the key point there is we definitely need to be drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using these natural techniques. That's restoring peat bogs and planting trillions and trillions of trees. But bear this in mind, and that is that it takes 30 years for trees to actually begin to absorb large amounts of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So if the IPCC tell us we want 45% cuts by the year 2030, trees aren't going to do it. And the politicians are pretending that they will. We need to be planting trees, trillions of them. and we need to stop chopping down trees, and we need to restore peatlands. But, it's not the whole answer. Dennis?
The other point there with trees is that in order for it to have sufficient effect, we'd have to cover the entire contiguous United States with trees.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the- James and then Alicia. James first.
So where do you see the role of Extinction Rebellion moving now? I think a lot of people, when the Extinction Rebellion first started, the general population weren't aware of Extinction Rebellion until they saw the quote in Oxford Circus. And that kind of shock factor, I think, did, half of the Extinction Rebellion's early tactics were to do with generating media interest to just talk about the climate crisis. There are so many people sat at home who might not be aware of the climate crisis. Those Extinction Rebellion early tactics were just put it on the BBC News and the evening news so that you can start understanding and talking.
Yeah.
Where is it that you now see Extinction Rebellion moving to be able to push, now that we've kind of exhausted all of those shock tactics and we're starting to see the police be able to deal with Extinction Rebellion in a new manner?
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is that October was very hard for us. We had the Canning Town incident, and that's knocked a fair bit of public support for Extinction Rebellion. Now, we're planning another rebellion period during May of this year. Here's the crucial point. I do not believe that we can win. We will not succeed unless we get huge numbers of additional people joining us. Without that, huge increase in numbers, I guarantee you we will fail. So for me, I see May as crucial to this. Either people come out and they join that rebellion in unprecedented numbers, or we're screwed. Alicia.
Yeah, it's just a comment about the trees. If you looked at John's slide, I'm also an Extinction Rebellion member. If you looked at John's slide, by 2060, half the world is in drought. All those trees will not survive if they haven't got water in drought. So it sounds like this is what the politicians are pushing. Let's plant trees, and I'm not against planting trees. Trees are beautiful, but they will not survive. So it's no good planting them. So you've got 1 trillion trees, and only 10% of them survive a parched earth. So, there's no easy answer to this. It's very complex. But it's only by people getting out there and saying we want something done now will we actually achieve it.
Absolutely right. Ian, Charlie, and then another chap here. But Ian, it is Ian, isn't it?
I guess just quickly, I trade in the genteel world of farmers markets and farm fairs 3 days a week. The support that I come across at farmers markets for Extinction Rebellion is a real eye-opener. Invariably, it's from families. What's happened, I found in the 5 years I've been trading in my company, I've gone from grandparents being concerned about the future for their grandchildren, down to parents being concerned about their children's future, down to with the school strikes, and school children are starting to realise. So I think anything that Extinction Rebellion considered in the future has to include a family opportunity to go out together. I'm a very passive supporter of Extinction Rebellion. I think there are millions of people like me. But if you could arrange an event where people went to their village park or stood outside on their village green, I guess you have got to have your main centres, don't get me wrong. But there are a lot of people that would quite willingly come out. And this wonderful piece of technology, which I hate with a passion, if you coincided with a video that people could watch in a park with other families, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at the number of people that come out and support the more, physical, in-your-face activists of Extinction Rebellion. I really do believe that. I've had dads come up and they've looked at my stall, different products that we sell. One chap said to me, "What you need is a bloody good revolution. It's a shame we're not in France." And this guy was every inch of the way. They got on the train at 7 o'clock in the morning and went up to London into the city and then came home at night and probably didn't see his kids until Saturday morning. If you're going to get that kind of reaction from someone, you're never ever going to expect to have a sympathy towards Extinction Rebellion. It's a big market untapped.
Okay, I'm going to just perhaps put a word of caution against that, and that is that I've been in this business for 36 years, and I have tried absolutely everything. And if people actually looked at some of the things I've been involved in over those 36 years, it is extraordinary. And after all that time, it was only with Extinction Rebellion kicked up a hell of a fuss in April that we got those 7 outcomes. And the painful truth we actually face is that we do have to accept that real sacrifice of doing something out of our comfort zone. You don't have to be arrested on that, beside that pink boat. It's not essential that you're arrested, but you will be in some capacity in a place that supports a non-violent act of civil disobedience. So Charlie, and then there's another chap here who wants to speak. Charlie.
I want to carry on with the theme. I'm from the Extinction Rebellion too, by the way. I want to carry on with the theme of people power, because it is the only way that we do it. And the only way, Extinction Rebellion have got a mass mobilisation strategy now for this year. It's obviously going to change a bit because of coronavirus. They have a unit that's actually considering what the impact of coronavirus will have on the planned strategy already. But the point is that everywhere there is Extinction Rebellion, every place there is, we have to be effective and active. And to be effective and active, we need people in roles, and the key roles so far for us here in Southend are press and media. We need people to support us in press and media. We need people to come on board with us. We need people to help us with publicity. And we need people to do some planning as well. We've got people in place, but the burden is actually quite high. So we actually need help. People that are willing, have got time to do it, and people who will commit themselves to a few hours a week. We need people to come to us, and we will do the rest. I think actually meetings like this are really helpful, but I think that mass mobilisation depends on us getting on the streets and using various techniques, like rebel ringing is one of the techniques that we use, street stalls, which is sort of pretty low key, leafleting, bill posting, but also getting people in meetings, house meetings, working in your neighbourhood and working on your contacts. So there's millions of there's very many techniques like that that we can all use, but we have to be powerful and effective. Each place where there is an Extinction Rebellion group, that local group, we have to be effective, and we need people. We need people to do that.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Just give a couple of examples. Over the last 6 weeks, we've had 3 events locally in Southend. We had a demonstration up by the Odeon Cinema about Southend Airport, and we've got lots of people who are being impacted by the extreme noise now, caused by night flights and cargo flights. Got the local community active and came along to a protest, thing that a lot of people have never done before. That was a really good turnout, led by Extinction Rebellion. And then we had a protest down in Shrewsbury, Gunners Park, where the plan is to build houses below sea level next to a seawall that can't even cope with Storm Kira. It seems insane, but that's what the plan is. So we had a big demo down there. And then the most recent demonstration was we had a die-in at HSBC, the top end of the high street. Now, you've got people, Charlie, myself, Alicia, who are willing to be arrested if necessary, but around us are huge numbers of people who are not willing to be arrested, but they're there holding the banners. They're handing out the leaflets to people. We need people. We need people for those jobs. There's a chap here who he's had a point ago.
Going to endorse what you're saying. I mean, to make any difference at all, it's got to be people's power. I mean, that was seen with the Berlin Wall. That didn't come down because of politics, it came down because of people's power. Yeah. And that's what you need. Problem is, we live in a society where people are apathetic. I mean, I have lots of friends. I still have trouble getting through to them. These are intelligent people, not idiots, but they still want to think, well, it's perhaps not going to happen, and science will take over. I don't know, as you just said. So the question is, how do you get to this amount of people? It's a big problem. I mean, I belong to the Green Party in Chelsea, so does my friend here, and we have 137 members. The population of Chelsea is, I don't know, what is it, population of Chelsea? Sorry, there you go. Yeah. We've got 137. This is the problem. I mean, we've got to somehow get through to people and get masses of people out.
Charlie's, one of the founders of the Southend Group. So back to, Charlie here.
I just want to add that there's 3 of us here, that anybody here at the moment who's interested in giving some support for us can actually devote a few hours a week. Then just give us your names or contact details and we'll do the rest. We'll get in touch with you and we'll do the rest. And spread the word. That's the other thing, is spread the word to people that you know.
Yeah. Now, Alicia, you do the formal Extinction Rebellion heading for Extinction talk, don't you? So my one today, because of the nature of the audience here, is slightly different. But you're happy to do that, deliver that talk anywhere. So, yeah, you know, if you are associated with any community group, whether it be a religious group, church group, school, whatever, then I'd strongly recommend that you try to set up a talk, get us involved, and we'll come along and do it. Charlie, back to Charlie.
I want to add one more thing. One of the key points about the strategy of Extinction Rebellion is that we are a movement of movements. We don't want to take over anybody's movement. Green Party, Greenpeace, all the environmental movements, Friends of the Earth, we're all in it together. And beyond that, NGOs as well. Extinction Rebellion is talking to NGOs now nationally, because really we are non-governmental, and that's the key part about it, and we need to unite to do this. Unity is the absolute thing, solidarity and unity. That's why we all need to get together and work together.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, look, I dare say, I don't think James is going to throw me off the stage dead on 1 o'clock, but James, yeah, get out. But, you know, anybody who hasn't had a say yet want to make a point or a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I was there in April and he was dancing in front of me, actually, one of the drink program, I've got it on video. And I just think it's been a massive force for good, Extinction Rebellion. I think it's just been, it has almost been revolutionary. It's just, there's a wave of energy swelled up. And since then, I think it's really polarised people, a little bit like Brexit has. And I think we live in peculiar times where people are completely divided. And I have these conversations virtually every day. And it's really, really difficult to get through to people the science and the reality. They just can't comprehend it. And so I think we're going to reach a saturation point where, you know, you could literally saturate the whole country so that everybody knows about Extinction Rebellion, and I'm sure they do already. Not to mention Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and all the green initiatives out there. But I think there's going to come a point where it's going to become like Brexit. People will dig their heels in, and they're either on board or they're not. You know, and hopefully some people will have like an epiphany and a realisation, and it will suddenly dawn on them. But at the moment, it's really difficult because, like Al Gore said all those years ago, it's an inconvenient truth. Most people don't want to accept it because it fundamentally alters their way of life, their lifestyle.
Can I draw in two other people? There's one chap here who's had his hand up for a while, and then back to James.
I was just saying that I completely agree with this incident about the apathy of people, and it's really hard to come across every day when you're talking to people and saying, look, and then you go and see them go and get another Starbucks or whatever and walk into the office. But it's really frustrating. But what I've found is you can't dictate to people, scare them into, and that's the way of pushing them away and going, oh, thank you, I can do what I want. I think the best way is, which Extinction Rebellion are doing, from what I can see, is to live by example and just to show. I mean, I'm not part of Extinction Rebellion, but I was really pleased to see what you guys were doing, and I'm thinking about joining. And it was the way in which there was no reason people being on the streets. It wasn't anarchy. It wasn't that. It was because it was obvious that people cared.
Yep.
I mean, I recently watched a programme about the Extinction Rebellion on TV. And I'm so, you know, we're seeing that those guys get caught with the trains, just like this is the opposite of what we were supposed to achieve. And it feels like people are looking for, to call Extinction Rebellion anarchists. That's what they're looking to do. Yeah. And you've just got to be careful not to go down that line.
Definitely. I'd hope the Extinction Rebellion, everybody there has learned from that lesson. And, you know, it's a young movement, and we're going to get hurt. We are going to learn lessons, sometimes the hard way. Yeah. Okay, James, I don't know if you're going to wrap us up at this point, or it's a point of question.
So firstly, you can't carry any anarchists here. I think you can get cards. Oh, you do? We print our own. There's something a vicar told me when I was quite young. It's kind of stuck with me in all sorts of various different social campaigns I've worked on, you know, the couple of years that I've been doing in politics. And that is that in order to actually reach to someone, you have to speak in the language that they understand.
I think one of the biggest problems that we have in green left politics, Extinction Rebellion, Green Party, Liberal Democrats, Friends of the Earth, all that kind of stuff, we kind of bombard people with the science and the kind of this is why you should be scared element of it. And I think that, as we saw, you mentioned Brexit, people are tired of experts. People are tired of hearing the news, hearing the statistics around how, in a lifetime in which they can't yet imagine there's going to be untold consequences for them.
Yeah.
But I think the genuine way that we do change this, as a couple of people have already mentioned, is actually having these conversations with people on how it will directly affect them. Start talking to them in the language in which they understand. When I've had conversations with people on the doorstep of the Green Party, I've had people open the door and go, oh, you're just those bloody environmentalists, tree hugger weirdos. And I say to them, I'm like, do you have children? Or do you have family that have children? And they say, yes. I said, well, how would you feel knowing that potentially in 20 years' time, your child could be without food or water? How do you feel the idea that your child will live a life, not quite as privileged as the one that you have, potentially without a home in a war-torn country, potentially having to flee this part of the world for a safer area? How does that make you feel? They feel terrified.
Yeah.
Unimaginable amounts of terror fling through their mind. When you say to them, this isn't just fanciful nonsense that the Green left are making up for some conspiracy. This is just actual science that we're kind of all aware of. We now have a collective awareness of it. We're trying to drive the change. When you put it in those terms, people do start to understand it. So I think there's a couple of people in here who said actually having those conversations with people who at first go, you're a green left tree hugging weirdo. If you say it to them in a language that they can understand, and present it in a way that isn't just, hello, I'm a book-reading intellectual, and I think you are stupid. Eventually say it to someone in a way that they're going to get it, we might actually start being able to drive some change small scale.
Okay. There's a chap here who had his hand up. Just before I come to you, you'll see that I put this image up, and I think I could have put an image up of the fires in Australia, and that is about a person's emotional reaction, how they connect with the disaster. So over this chap here. Oh, you.
Right. I would advise people who want to persuade other people to look up something called street epistemology. There's a guy on YouTube with brilliant tutorials on it, based on the Socratic method. He's dealing with religious fanatics. But the thing is, you have to ask the right questions. You have to get people thinking, and you must not expect to change their minds overnight. You make them uncomfortable, let them go away, think about it, and maybe meet up with you again later. If you push, they'll just stop, they'll just block. But if you ask them questions that make them think, that actually works. Very hard, I'm rubbish at it. But the term you're looking for is street epistemology, based on the Socratic method. If you've read anything about Socrates, you know he asked all the questions.
Okay, really good point. Yeah, really good point. I'll give you an example. I do a lot of work with the media for Extinction Rebellion, and I'm currently just a really tough piece of work for me, and that is I'm buying the Times and the Sun every day and looking at the Murdoch press, and you can see where the Sun whips up hatred towards all environmentalists, but particularly Extinction Rebellion. So the messages I'm trying to convey to them there are looking at values, conservative values, right-wing values, about legacy, leaving property to people who follow you, ideas of courage, protecting your family, pride. So I'm trying to find the right kind of language to appeal to them to actually confront this. Extinction Rebellion often says this is beyond politics. I'm not sure if people completely agree with that. Personally, I think my feeling it's very political. But yeah, but you're absolutely right. We have to find other ways of sowing the seeds and trying to get people to connect with this in a different way. If you don't reach them one way, let's try and reach them another way.
Charlie.
Just one more thing. I just want to say to everybody, it isn't dead serious, Extinction Rebellion. It's actually fun on the streets. It's really important to say that. It's very creative, so it engages every part of us. The aim is really for us all to have fun, as well as to confront something that's terrible.
Right, thank you. Steve? I don't know if James is going to lob anything hard at me, but Steve?
Just the last point, really. I think
if you at Martin Luther quote, I have a dream, how far it would convince people if he said I have a nightmare? You have to show people the potential of what good and better society can come out of this.
Could I just finish on a very quick positive note? That I think the Heathrow decision was a fundamental step change. And I think we can add to that Bristol planning application last week was refused, and so was Stansted's planning application for their new terminal was refused. And I think there's so many lawyers now converting or starting to specialise in environmental law, and like the work that Colin Higgins was doing with the Rome Treaty and trying to get ecocide back onto the Rome Treaty so it becomes enshrined in international law. I think the most powerful, I wouldn't like to say weapon, but the most powerful tool at our disposal is the legal system. Because the legal system, nobody's above the law, well they shouldn't be. And so on a positive note, I can really feel that everything's moving into a positive direction. Probably not fast enough for most of us here, but it on a positive note.
Okay, yeah. If I may quickly pick up on a point you mentioned there, that is that the 1,300, 1,400 people who were arrested, some of them didn't end up in court because there were faults with the way they were arrested and they weren't dragged through the courts, but most of them were, and I was one of them. And having that huge number of people going through the judicial process didn't just have the effect of clogging up the courts. Something else that I don't think any of us had expected did happen, and that was that mostly articulate, really intelligent people and well-intentioned people were appearing before the judges. Hundreds of judges and magistrates heard our people before them, stand before them, whether they pleaded guilty or not guilty, and leave that judge in absolutely no doubt that we were wholly justified in doing what we were doing. Now, I was involved in another piece of campaign work with Dennis here, Dennis Walker here, for Plan B Earth, and we launched 2 judicial reviews of government's policies. One of them, the decision was reached before the April Rebellion, and the government and the judiciary refused a judicial review of government's climate change policies. We're taking it all the way through the whole appeal process. The courts wouldn't even let us in through the front door. Now, what had happened after April, and all those trials, all those plea hearings, hundreds of judges hearing what we had to say, and that realisation that we're wholly justified in doing what we did, then, quite unexpectedly, we had the Heathrow decision, but not only did they let us in through the front door, we won. And I think that's a huge part that we hadn't predicted. A huge part of this story is that at every opportunity we are taking the chance to explain to the police, the judges, whoever it may be, that this is an existential threat. We have to act. As I say, though, I'll emphasise, as Charlie did, there are a series of different ways in which we can act. You don't have to be arrested. But if I am going to be arrested, one thing's for sure, I want somebody there who'll give me support, somebody who'll pick me up and catch me when I come out of the police station at midnight. And that did happen, And it's really important that there are a group of people around you who will look after you at a time of, well, it's a hard time. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. So I think probably, James, we've got other speakers coming, so you need to prepare for them. So we'll probably ought to wrap up now. All right? Okay, that's us. Oh. Extinction Rebellion has a paper, the Hourglass. Please help yourself to those copies there. Great. Cheers.
Thank you, Jonathan Fuller. So we'll have a brief sort of 15, 20-minute break. Get yourself a drink. By all means, there's some fudge and all sorts of stalls at the back. Please go and have a look at those. The fudge is delicious. And we'll be back at about past with Sherry Fuller talking about universal basic income.